She was never hit, never screamed at. But something inside her still broke, and no one noticed. No bruises, no punishments. Just a quiet, invisible wound that opened slowly and stayed open for years. Not because of what was done to her, but because of what no one understood. She was called sweet, quiet, sensitive. But underneath that softness was a storm. She didn't speak much, but she knew. She knew when something was off before anyone said a word. She knew when her mum had been crying in the next room, even if the tissues were already thrown away. She knew when a smile didn't match the energy in the room. And she couldn't turn it off. Before she could spell the word empathy, she was drowning in it. She felt the world before she understood it. And the world felt sharp. Loud places made her flinch. Sadness in others made her stomach ache. Anger made her chest tight, even when it wasn't directed at her. She didn't know why she felt everything, only that no one else seemed to. There's a word from Japanese culture, amae. It means the longing to be held gently without having to earn it. She longed for that too. Not praise, not correction, just a soft place to exist, to feel, to be. But instead of comfort, she got confusion. Why are you crying again? Don't take it so personally. You're too young to worry about that. She learned early that her feelings were inconvenient, that people didn't know what to do with someone who noticed everything. So she started hiding what she noticed. And still, her body kept noticing, kept absorbing, kept responding. Dr. Elaine Aron might have called her a highly sensitive person. A child whose nervous system was wired to process the world more deeply, whose brain picked up what others missed, whose mirror neurons worked overtime. But she didn't have those words. She just thought she was broken. There's an old fable, rarely told, about a violin carved from the wood of a lightning-struck tree. It was so finely tuned it could hear the forest breathe. Birds, footsteps, the rustle of leaves. It played melodies no other instrument could, but the villagers found it unsettling. Too haunting, too honest. So they called it strange and hid it in a box. She was that violin. A beautiful wild instrument tuned to the sorrow and wonder of the world and punished for it. And still she tried to be easy. She tried to stay quiet when the room was tense. She tried not to ask too many questions. She tried not to cry when others didn't. But her body told the truth even when her face didn't. And every time she failed to hide it, every tear, every tremble, every moment of too much, the world offered her the same silent judgment. You are wrong for feeling this way. So she began to vanish. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just a little more each day, until even she forgot what it felt like to be fully there. The first time she was told she was too sensitive, it didn't sound cruel, it sounded like advice. A teacher smiled and said, "You'll have to toughen up, sweetheart." A relative laughed and said, "You can't cry over everything forever." A friend rolled their eyes and said, "You're being dramatic." They weren't trying to wound her, they were trying to shape her. But what they shaped was silence, because she didn't stop feeling. She just stopped showing it. Every tear she swallowed, every worry she buried, every quiet truth she kept inside to make other people more comfortable. She learned that performing calm was safer than being honest. She became the child who never caused problems. The child who helped clean up other people's messes. The child who knew exactly how to make someone smile without ever asking if she was okay. There's a paradox we never warn children about. The better you are at sensing what others need, the easier it is to forget what you need. She learned to feel without speaking, to absorb without reacting, to show up for others and disappear for herself. And the world called her mature. They didn't realize she was grieving for a self that had to go missing just to be accepted. Dr. Gabor Mate writes, when we have to choose between attachment and authenticity, the child will always choose attachment. And that's what she did. Every time she made herself smaller to fit into someone else's comfort, she chose survival over self. At home, she sat quietly while the room filled with unspoken arguments. She played the peacemaker when no one asked her to. She smiled while her parents stormed in and out, pretending not to notice the tightness in her own chest. At school, she was the easy one. Not because life was easy, but because she refused to be a burden. But the weight of what she never said started pressing on her body. Headaches, stomach aches, a tight throat that never quite relaxed. Her nervous system was carrying every emotion the room wouldn't acknowledge. And the longer it went on, the better she got at pretending. She smiled at jokes she didn't find funny. Said I'm fine before anyone could ask. Helped everyone else calm down, even when she was crumbling inside. And here's the trap that most never escape. The more convincingly you fake strength, the less likely anyone is to notice you need help. So she became invisible in plain sight. Until one day she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the person smiling back. It wasn't a breakdown, not yet. But it was the beginning of a question she could no longer ignore. What did I lose in the process of being easy to love? And underneath that question, another, what if I was never too much? What if the world just didn't know how to hold this much beauty? This much empathy, this much truth. If you've ever been told you're too sensitive, drop a sprout in the comments. Let the ones still hiding know they're not alone, not anymore. By the time she reached her teens, she had become a master of emotional disguise. She wore strength like a second skin, not because she wanted to, but because the world kept rewarding her for it. When people said she was so mature, what they really meant was, you don't make us uncomfortable with your feelings. When they praised her calm, what they really meant was, thank you for not needing anything from us. And so she gave the world what it asked for. She became the rock, the listener, the one who stayed composed when everyone else unraveled. But no one noticed the cost. Because she didn't fall apart in front of them, she did it quietly. In bathrooms and journals. In locked bedrooms where tears could fall unseen. She stopped crying where people could see her, not because she stopped feeling, but because she had learned the deeper the emotion, the more alone it made her. She stopped expressing joy too, at least the unfiltered kind. Because big feelings, even the good ones, were risky. They got labeled dramatic, childish, too intense. So she learned to regulate, to filter, to shrink. Not just her emotions, but her presence. Not just her vulnerability, but her voice. And because she made it look easy, no one thought to ask if she was okay. There's a cruel twist to being the one who holds it all together. You become the person others lean on and forget you're still learning how to stand. She remembered everything. She remembered her dad's silences like echoes through the years. Her mother's anxious sighs that said more than words ever could. The way she used to tiptoe into a room and know before a single word was spoken whether it was safe to be a child that day. She remembered how early she stopped asking for things. Not just toys or attention, but space, gentleness, permission to feel. She called it strength. They called it independence, but it was neither. It was abandonment dressed up as self-sufficiency. And it made her good at surviving, but terrible at receiving. Because somewhere along the line, she had made a quiet agreement with the world. If I never ask for anything, maybe you'll let me stay. So she poured herself into others, friends, partners, strangers. She gave without question, loved without boundaries, carried what wasn't hers to carry. She could read the emotional temperature of a room in seconds, but had no idea how to name what was going on inside her own chest. And when she started to feel the edges of collapse, she did what she always did. She smiled, said she was just tired, blamed it on a long week, pushed it down a little deeper, until her body began to protest. Panic attacks that came out of nowhere. Exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. a constant ache she couldn't name. She saw doctors who found nothing wrong, but something was wrong, not in her body. In the deal she made, the one where she traded visibility for survival. She had become so good at managing other people's emotions that she no longer had space for her own. And the more invisible her needs became, the more valuable she was to others. That's the paradox. The more you disappear, the more the world applauds your strength. They saw her composure, her competence, her care. But no one saw the girl inside her still begging to be held. And when the weight became too much to carry, it didn't collapse all at once. It cracked, a tiny fracture, a pause mid-sentence. A moment when she couldn't smile on command. And in that crack, something terrifying and holy whispered, "You don't have to do this anymore." But to let go, she would have to face the one thing she had spent her whole life avoiding. Her own need to be seen. Not for what she could do, not for who she could save, but for who she already was. The child with the trembling lip. The girl who felt everything. The woman still hiding behind a smile. And once she saw her, really saw her, she couldn't unsee her again. Not even if she wanted to. Not even if it hurt. It wasn't sudden. It didn't happen with a scream. It didn't come with a meltdown or a panic attack. It came with a silence that stretched too long. A pause between breaths that turned into collapse. She didn't plan to fall apart. She had places to be. Deadlines, people counting on her. But something cracked, something old, something buried. It wasn't just a bad day, it wasn't even just a bad week. It was the sound of a dam giving way after years of whispers saying, "You're fine." She wasn't fine. She hadn't been fine for a very long time. And now her body refused to keep pretending. She found herself sobbing on a bathroom floor, hands shaking, breath shallow. Not because of one event, but because everything inside her had finally demanded to be felt. This wasn't a breakdown, this was a jailbreak. For years she had built walls to keep the pain out, but those same walls had kept her in. Now, in the quiet of collapse, something ancient stirred. A memory, maybe, of being 5? Of crying in a room full of adults who told her to hush. Of hiding under a table because the tension in the air felt louder than words she thought she'd forgotten, but the body remembers. And now it was done waiting. At first she feared the unraveling. She feared the sobs that came without warning, the images that surfaced uninvited, the sheer weight of emotion flooding her system. But something strange happened. The more she let go, the more she felt herself come back. She thought feeling everything would kill her, but it didn't. It freed her. Because underneath the exhaustion, underneath the overachieving and the smiling and the caretaking was the original girl, the one who felt sunsets in her chest, who cried over dead birds and wrote poems about the wind, the one who'd been told she was too much, when in fact she had always just been whole. In that moment, she didn't need answers. She didn't need a diagnosis, she needed a mirror. Not to fix her, but to finally show her the truth, that she wasn't broken, she was just full of feelings that had never been allowed to live. And now they were no longer asking, they were blooming, because sometimes the most beautiful things grow in the cracks. She had spent her whole life trying not to be too much. But now, with tears on her face and light in her eyes, she realized too much was exactly what she needed to be. She thought healing would feel like fire. Something explosive, something clear, like a sudden thunderstorm that swept her away and made everything right again. But that's not what healing felt like. It came slowly, quietly, with no fanfare. It was more like the tide returning to shore, imperceptible at first, but unstoppable once it began. It came in moments she barely noticed, in the quiet of an afternoon when she chose to rest instead of pushing through. in the way she held her own hand in the mirror just a little longer without guilt. In the moment, she told herself, I don't need to explain myself. Healing didn't come in big gestures. It came in the small acts of self-kindness she had never been able to offer before. The little decisions that showed she was ready to stop abandoning herself. She learned to give herself the care she had always so freely given others. The comfort of holding herself in the moment of pain. The permission to cry when it felt necessary. The space to say, I need help without shame. She didn't need to be fixed, she realized. She needed to be seen. She needed to be heard. She needed to stop pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. And she needed to stop apologizing for needing care. No one had ever taught her that self-love was as crucial as caring for others. It was like she had been walking a fine line her entire life. Never too bold, never too loud, never too demanding, but always just enough to be noticed when someone needed something from her. Always offering help, advice, energy, even when she had none left for herself. But now for the first time she could hear her own heartbeat without drowning it out with noise. She could breathe without the weight of expectations. She could feel without fear of being judged. The child inside her had never been the problem. It was the world around her that didn't know how to hold her softness. She wasn't too sensitive, she wasn't too much. She was just deeply alive, and that was exactly what the world needed. There's a powerful story from Persian folklore that speaks of a cracked pot, one that was seen as flawed because it leaked water. But as the pot walked its path, it realized the water it leaked nourished the flowers growing alongside it. What others saw as a flaw, the pot had always secretly known. It was meant to help the earth bloom, not to be perfect. She was that pot. Cracked, yes. Leaking, yes. But she had always watered something beautiful along the way. And now, with a gentleness she had never before known, she began to fill the spaces inside her that had been hollowed out by years of neglect. For the first time, she didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to be present. She became the person who could sit in silence without feeling the need to explain herself. The person who could cry without worrying about being judged for her emotions. The person who could feel and feel fully without apologizing for it. In giving herself permission to love the child who had always waited, she became the adult she had always needed. It didn't happen all at once. It wasn't some grand transformation. It was a slow unfolding, a steady journey toward realizing that the strength she had always searched for had never been in hiding her sensitivity, but in owning it. It didn't come from hardening herself to the world. It came from learning to soften. To soften in ways that didn't make her weak, but made her unshakable. The world had taught her that strength looked like control, like resistance, like power over others. But what if true strength wasn't about control at all? What if it was about release? What if it was about vulnerability? What if it was about standing soft in the middle of a storm, knowing that you would not break? She thought strength was about keeping everything together. But in reality, strength is the ability to stay open in the hardest of times, to feel the pressure and still choose love, tenderness, and presence. She started to understand that the world didn't need her to be invincible. What it needed was for her to be fully herself. The world didn't need her to be a rock, impervious to the waves. It needed her to be a river, soft, flowing, unafraid of her own depth. And here's the paradox: the softer she became, the more powerful she felt. The more she allowed herself to be fully human, the more unstoppable she became. She no longer had to hide, no longer had to shrink, no longer had to apologize for being too much. She realized she wasn't too sensitive. She was just deeply attuned to life. She wasn't too soft. She was beautifully open. True strength, she realized, isn't the ability to avoid the cracks in your soul. It's the ability to let them grow, to let them become part of you, to let them soften the world around you. And so she stayed soft, she stayed open, she stayed human. She didn't need the armor anymore. She didn't need to prove her strength by how much she could endure. She proved it by how much she could feel, by how much she could love, by how much she could offer the world without losing herself. She became the person who walked through life with an open heart, who could say no without guilt, who could love without hesitation, who could rest without shame. And in that softness she found her greatest strength.